smart statistics, journey mapping, and behavioral science.
I think looking in the past 20 years, so when I just started, I had to work really hard to prove to people, hey, a better experience yields financial results.
Hey guys, I'm Janeza Niazi, author of Navigating Service Design, and joining me is another fellow service designer from the STD community, Samyukta. And together, we're on a mission to uncover two key aspects that most service designers struggle with. One is how do we measure or show impact in a short time? And two, how do we create sticky behavior changes? And to do so, we have invited a special guest, Zanna Van der Aa. Zanna Van der Aa has been driving force in customer experience transformation globally for over 2 decades. Her work is based on her PhD research, which showed that treating people well yields financial results for companies. She has a unique scientific approach to CX transformation, combining what she calls smart statistics, journey mapping, and behavioral science. Her purpose-driven methodology emphasizes enhancing CX through employee experience, demonstrating how deeply intertwined CX is with EX. So today, we're thrilled to learn from her. Thank you, Zanna, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Always happy to share some experiences.
Yes, and we're really excited. I also wanted to let the listeners know that you have your own podcast as well, and you do explain a lot of these topics in detail. So we won't be able to cover a lot of these topics in detail. So if anyone's interested to know more about your processes and methodologies, they can always reach out to you or go through your podcast as well. And is there anything else that they should be looking into if they want to know more about all of your methodologies, Zanna?
I think the podcast is the perfect starting point because we cover a lot, and from there you see YouTube videos, you see a book, you see, there's no shortage in me creating content.
Yes. Awesome. So we wanted to know that your drive has been to create human-centric organizations. Where did that trigger come from?
Well, I think if we go back long enough, right, I might have, kind of a tiny issue to feel like I need to change and save the world, right? But maybe more concretely, I think a lot of companies, how they are treating people, a lot of, let's say, customers, but also employees feel a bit like they, don't have the power, right? They are dependent on large corporations. And they feel a bit like, hey, maybe I can go to another company, but I will probably also be treated bad, right? That's sort of the sense that a lot of people have, like this powerlessness. And for some reason, I've always had the drive to feel like, for me, it's unbelievable that companies treat people like that. So I feel the need, even if I don't succeed in this life, at least to try and make a difference.
But have you been on the receiving end as well, sometime during your journey in your career?
Well, I was going to say yes on the customer side for sure. I think on a journey, on my career path, I think I've been very lucky. Well, it depends a bit, right? So my DNA is when I feel like, so I never knew exactly, okay, what do I want to do, what I want to be. But I always had the courage of when I felt, okay, this is not it, to sort of stop without knowing what the next step would be and just, follow the universe, follow whatever came across on my path. So I think I've always been lucky to have also managers along the way that they felt something or trusted me to give me the freedom to do my PhD, to create my own concept. So I think in that sense, on a career side, I've been very lucky and or very stubborn, but I had the opportunity to be like that. And yes, as a customer, of course, how often do you call a call center where they promise to call you back in 24 hours and they actually do that, right? For me, that's always the crazy example.
Yeah, but help me understand something. So does improving CX have a direct impact on business growth?
Definitely. So I think looking in the past 20 years, so when I just started, I had to work really hard to prove to people, hey, a better experience yields financial results. And we were making all these complex models. Okay, we could reduce maybe churn by 1%. What does an average customer make? Okay, so this might be this amount. But it has a huge amount of assumptions, right? So director level that's not really convinced will say, too many assumptions. I'm not a believer. So I think two things happened along the way. One is that I maybe figured out a smarter way to prove the financial impact, which I'm happy to elaborate on. But I think more importantly, the McKinseys, the Forresters, I mean, there's now so many proof from very, well-known institutions that what I love to see is that now it's not so much, hey, prove it has financial impact. Most people are already convinced, but the question now becomes, okay, but how do I get there? And I think that's where the key question lies, and that's where a lot of the methodology also fits in. Okay, but should I be faster? Should I reduce waiting times? Should I give more personal attention? That to me is much more the question than that we have to prove again that it yields financial results.
Right. But when you say that we don't have to prove that it yields financial results, so you think, can we say that the organizations have matured today to understand that CX is important, or do you still find yourself pitching that, hey, improve your CX because that's the one that's driving your organization's success?
No, indeed. So that was definitely the case 20 years ago. What I'm now seeing is that companies' boards are convinced. You cannot say nowadays that you don't think that CX matters, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's the good news. So I don't meet a lot of companies that feel, hey, I need to be convinced about the importance of CX. They believe that. What I do think is that what I see happening is that CX is becoming more and more important, but the quality of CX is actually going down from our perception.
Okay.
So the gap between those two, for me, is a risk, and that's why I'm sharing a lot of content, because I think we need to elevate the CX field as a whole. So I'm also more and more sort of splitting between CX, let's say the operational side of CX, mapping journeys, measuring touch points, versus CX transformation, where I combine purpose, I combine employee experience, I combine CX. And I think we need to move much more to that transformational side of CX if we don't want to lose the importance that it has now.
So what do you mean by there is a huge gap? So when you say purpose, EX, the quality of all that is low, how exactly are you showing right now to companies that this is where the gap is, versus you're saying you want to improve your CX but you don't actually believe in it, because that's why there is a gap in the success of CX work, and that's why you've come up with a CX transformation strategy as well. So what is that difference? How are you explaining companies understand their belief versus how do you actually drive that impact?
I think on two levels, right? So for me, the gap of CX becoming more important versus the quality going down, I think that's more a CX professionals issue, right? That's a CX field issue that we need to elevate. And I think within companies that it also explains why, for example, I think one of my recent LinkedIn posts was, of course, to trigger a bit, was to say, but CEOs should not have CX on their agenda. They should have CX transformation on their agenda. And because CX is often way too operational, I mean, a CEO doesn't care that you're measuring a touch point, right? But a CEO does care about, hey, making sure that everything we design, we develop, is from a customer perspective, because we know that CX is the best way to differentiate ourselves, right? We're not going to win with the transactional basic stuff. All our competitors can copy that. So I think everybody's convinced about that, but then they wonder, okay, because CX is often so operational or also a bit fluffy, right? It's often qualitative research, which of course is also direct link, right, to service design. And I think that a lot of companies, they are still used to having hard quantitative metrics. And so you need to figure out, I think that's the gap I've been able to bridge with the PhD, that I can now say, okay, this fluffy thing called experience, I can translate into hard steerable metrics that speaks the language of the organization. I think that's a key thing where you can make the switch and not have a nice CX project and a CX team doing CX, but saying, hey, this is something that the whole company should really rally behind.
Can you share an example what that means or what that looks like? Because we understand CX. What is CX transformation? I think that's something that we're still trying to understand from you.
I think for me, so a few examples are, let me use one example. So almost everybody's using NPS, right? It's sort of the holy grail, even though Mr. Reichelt himself is now saying, I'm not sure if the NPS is moving in the right direction, right? So even he, the person who created NPS, is concerned. But still, everybody's using NPS. And one of my many comments on NPS, but this is just an example, is, for example, the root cause analysis, right? So you ask the NPS, would you recommend us? And either it's an open text. Why, Samyukta, did you give me that score? Well, I give an 8 because, I don't know, Janice was like super friendly. And so I started thinking about it, started rationalizing my answer. So we collect data and we think we found what matters to customers, but they are not actually the subconscious thing that matter most to customers. So it's not hard steerable data. Often they're presenting like, okay, the invoicing was mentioned, 20 times, the customer service was mentioned 10 times. So we assume that invoicing is the biggest driver, but it never is. So a lot of directors don't resonate with how you get hard steerable information from NPS. So that's why one element of my PhD was to figure out how can I use, you already mentioned, smart statistics to now really prove, okay, with statistics now we can say, hey, for example, give me personal attention when I become a customer is 5 times more impactful than, the speed of the onboarding journey. And now you have hard steerable data where you can say, okay, I only have limited resources, but hey, this thing is 5 times more impactful than fixing speed. So now the company can prioritize, you speak the language, and now you can start steering on CX. And then you also see within 3 months' time, you see a very steep increase of satisfaction, for example, because you're impacting exactly the things that matter most to customers.
Okay, I'm just gonna play the devil's advocate here. So let's say that let's say it's a bank and we do have a lot of customers, and let's say personal attention is something that most customers need because one, financial terminologies a lot of them do not understand, but then there is certain customers who are of high net worth for the bank versus some of them who are not, right? So as a company, do I essentially run the CX transformation to everyone at the same level, or do I pick my favorite customers where I'm getting most money and then I build a CX transformation for them? How do we go about it?
That's an interesting question because my first study, so I did business in IT, and my thesis was all about CRM, right? Back in the day, end of 1999. So your question, right? That's the essence of CRM. Should we only focus on high value customers or at least differentiate? And for me, one of the things I've learned is that because I've been doing this research across so many different countries, right? Different cultures. And this human aspect, right? Personal attention, treat me with respect, be there for me when I need you. It's so universal across all these cultures, let alone within different customer segments of a company, that my response, I think your question is like the number 2 or 3 FAQ that I get, right? But hey, aren't the drivers of segment A different than segment B? And my response is always, okay, let's first start with assuming that this is the driver for everybody. Then you start improving, and I'm going to challenge you and ask you 3 times, did you actually improve something? Yes, if you did. And the score is no longer going up. That's when I say, okay, then maybe the time has come to start differentiating. But 9 out of 10 times, there are such universal drivers and companies are at such a low level, right? They're always focusing on a transactional side. They're never focusing on the emotional side. So there's so much to be gained for everybody before it makes sense to say, okay, let's start differentiating between, any high value customers versus lower value customers.
Yeah. But how do you measure such, intangible elements that you're talking about, like personal attention? How do you go about measuring this and showing that this is one of the key drivers?
So what we tend to do is, we always start with, we say, do a pilot with one journey and run what we call a driver analysis. Let's see if it works for your organization first, right? So we always say, let's assume that we are still at the bank and we choose the onboarding new customers journey. So what we do is then we have a journey mapping session of 2 to 2.5 hours with all the different employees from all the different departments that play a role in that journey. So customer service, digital, marketing, finance, literally everyone. And so it could be 10 to 15 people in the room. And then I always say, I just start asking stupid questions. So I'm a customer. I go through the journey. Okay, I start on the website. I fill in the form. Do I get an email confirmation? Then people say, yeah, we think so. Okay, what does that email confirmation say? We're not sure. And so we cover, let's say, all the transactional element from the journey. That's 80% of the workshop. But only from the customer perspective, not from the internal process perspective. Then the last part is where we add the emotion. So it's also the as is, right? The current journey. And the last part we say, okay, think about your brand promise, think about just you being a customer and place yourself in their shoes. What emotions do you think the customer should experience when being onboarded with the bank? And then we say, just shout out emotions. Well, I think they would like personal attention. I think it should be trustworthy. I think, right? A whole list of maybe 10 or 15 emotions. Those two ingredients, so all the transactional steps in the journey, plus the emotions, then we built into a survey that's pretty long. So I'm not from the religion of the one question open text surveys. So a survey could be easily 30 to 40 statements. Yes, exactly. I see your wow. That's the generic response we get. Like, nobody's going to fill out those surveys.
Yeah, yeah.
They do. And then so that survey is a mix of the transactional steps, like the form was easy, but also indeed, bank gives me personal attention, all those questions. And then we send that survey to customers who have gone through that journey, minimum a week, maximum 4 weeks ago.
Okay.
Which should be relatively recent. And as soon as we have 100 surveys back, we can run these statistical analysis that I just showed you or explained. And then the statistics, I can mention the 3 analysis, right? Because that's something that's not that I created, we just combined things. So we use something that's called a factor analysis, that's the first one. Then regression analysis, that tells you, okay, but what's the impact? And then we do something to make this becomes a bit technical, but let's say to bring the 40 statements back to a top 10. And that top 10 shows you, hey, the first 3 statements, they all have something to do with personal attention. Those 3 statements are 5 times more impactful than all the statements around ease of doing things. And so that's how you get to the hard steerable information.
What exactly does personal attention mean as a driver? Is it a human giving personal attention, or is it a feedback loop being closed? Like, what do you mean by personal attention?
So I think that's also, so often I get the question, indeed, what do customers mean, right, with personal attention?
Yeah.
And I think one of the key, very subtle and not even conscious ways to resist change is to ask for additional analysis. Okay, so now we found the drivers. Shouldn't we also differentiate? Shouldn't we also have qualitative sessions to understand what personal attention means? And of course, by all means, if you have no idea, I think that's where qualitative research really adds value. So that's an option. What we tend to see is that when you start thinking about ideas, how you can give more personal attention, for example, the email, right? Maybe now it's a super transactional email. Thank you for the order. It'll be there in a week. Goodbye. You can, of course, design that email. Hey, Zanna, thanks so much for becoming a customer. I can add personal attention to an email, to an app, to a person in a call center. So in my experience, you can add so much personal attention before you need to figure out even what it means, because we all have an idea, right? Every employee has plenty of ideas how they can improve it. They just never had the time to think about how they can enhance personal attention.
Interesting. What are some of these drivers? Can you name few of them so that we can have them in our head? Because I'm thinking of NPS as a driver, but you said NPS is not a sales transformation driver. So can you give us an example of maybe 5 drivers for CX?
So when you look at the metrics, so I always say you still have the 3 key metrics in CX, right? We have the NPS, we have satisfaction, and we have the customer effort score. And I think the key, what is happening is that CX professionals are mixing up when to use which metric. So for me, you still want to use the 3 metrics, for example, but the customer effort score, you really only want to use on the UX side, because it's really transactional. It's really like the app made it easier for me to check my invoice, for example. Right? That's how the customer effort score is used. NPS for me, ideally we kill NPS, but I'm afraid that's too soon. So I always say, if you want to use NPS, only measure it like once a year as a brand NPS. Don't do anything with transactional NPS. That doesn't make sense. So the metrics, I often use satisfaction for journeys and satisfaction for the channels. But the drivers are still the drivers of satisfaction, right? So what's the fastest way to enhance satisfaction? Hey, in this case, personal attention in the onboarding journey is the fastest way to enhance satisfaction of onboarding.
Yeah.
So within this human driver, we tend to see things like be there for me when I need you. There was an example in let's say in a telco setting. Treat me with respect. Treat me as a human being, not as a file, right? Not as a number. We saw that in HR. We also saw that in the government context where I have social services. That's also where treat me with respect became a human element. So those are the things that are linked to. I always tend to say, if everybody that works in a company just treated everybody else as if they would treat their best friend, we would stop sending this crazy amount of surveys today. But unfortunately, right, that's not how the world works. So unfortunately, we still need those statistics to prove, hey, treating people well, yes, is the fastest way to make money, right? That's in essence what I've been trying to prove with the PhD.
So you never do qualitative research, is it? It's mostly purely quantitative survey-based learnings. You don't have to go back and check qualitatively.
No, so what we tend to do, we always do it quantitatively, and we always do it, let's say 80-20, right? So this is the journey that 80% of the customers go through, because we want to focus on maximizing impact, right? So we don't want to analyze all the possible exceptions. We constantly focus on the 80%. Then we start improving. So let's say we figure out personal attention is the number one. And so one of the things that we do is that we create tiny habits for employees to start thinking, okay, how can I give personal attention when I have a customer on the phone? And to me, so that part is always, so we are always translating the insights to then habits or improvements. And so far, knock on wood, we've been able to indeed increase satisfaction within 3 months' time. So far, from our, it's super fast, right? And that's not just a 0.1, it's also a big jump that we see then in satisfaction. So far, indeed, we did not need yet the qualitative research, because as I say, there's so much to be gained, because most companies have not done anything on an emotional level, that you can quickly, make a lot of jumps, definitely in the first 1 or 2 years.
It's very interesting that you said you had a jump in 3 months. So what did you do in those 3 months for that jump? Because I understood survey, we're measuring it. Let's say you are at a 5% or 10% as the satisfaction, and in 3 months you're getting 20-25%. What did you guys do in those 3 months?
So far, let's say with each company I've worked with, we've been able to do that, right? So it's a 100% score so far.
Okay.
And it's a mix of different things, but I think the key here, and I'll give you 2 examples, but I think the key is what I mentioned. The key is that we now know that companies know, okay, but where should I put the most energy? So I think the driver analysis is the key to aim all the energy, in this case, on personal attention. Because now you're improving on the right things, right? A lot of NPS programs, it takes a year or they don't see any impact because they think they're improving the right drivers, but they're not the key drivers that matter to customers on a subconscious level. So I think that's the key challenge. Then once you figure that out, then what we tended to do was we had 2 options. So of course you can start brainstorming together. So in the journey workshop, we have a team of all these different departments. You can then go back to them and say, hey, personal attention was the number 1 in the onboarding journey. Let's go through the journey and see detail level, okay, in the confirmation email. When they call us, where can we add personal attention snacks, right? I think that's one option. And that worked relatively well. So for example, when we were working with Randstad, that's a global number 1 HR, that's how we improved also within 3 months' time. For me, because I like to keep improving. So yes, it worked really well. But we also found that, and maybe you recognize this, when you do brainstorm sessions with employees, it tends to stay a bit abstract, or we need to change the CRM system. And it's all about everybody else and it's not about them. So we then enhanced it. We said, okay, we're not going to do the brainstorm sessions with employees. That's when I started experimenting with tiny habits. So what we now do is that we translate this number 1 driver, or the number 2 or 3, into a menu of 10 tiny habits. And then the employees can choose from the menu which habit resonates most with them. Because what we also saw is that in a lot of companies, they are still pretty focused on task steering, right? You need to have so many customers, so many sales.
Yeah.
So our aim was to empower employees, right? To not tell you what you need to do. So
right.
Personal attention, like McDonald's, smile, etc. We didn't want to define it for you. But what we saw is that when we said, hey, this is personal attention, it's a driver, go ahead and think of, best how, a lot of them were still struggling and feeling, but can you give us some examples of what we can do? And I think that's where the tiny habits is so far, right? Maybe in 2 years from now, I think we have an even better approach again. Very possible. But for now, it's a really fun, energizing, impactful way. And again, every time we saw the increase so far, right, in the results. Because for me, I'm not a believer in doing experience for the sake of experience.
Yeah.
I think if we cannot prove the business impact, then we should stop doing what we're doing.
Yeah, but oftentimes, because I work a lot with EX drivers as well, so when we say this to an employee that, hey, you have to give personal attention, which means X amount of time in their day is being used for a specific customer, which is impacting their KPI, which is again impacting their incentives, especially when you look at sales and on-ground teams. So how do you motivate employees to essentially pick up these tiny habits or this particular, so that the satisfaction score improves? Because for them, the improvement of satisfaction score won't be their driver. For them, it might be their incentive to get a better incentive this particular month. So how do you keep them motivated and inject that in their journey as well?
I think so. Two things. In the end, of course, you also need starting to address the KPIs, but indeed, I never start there because it's it takes way too long, too much discussion, right? It needs to become a organic moment where you feel, hey, maybe the KPIs are no longer aligned. So the magic that we're using, I think, are twofold or maybe threefold. I think the first thing is that the driver, like the personal attention, it's almost always connected to the sense of purpose of employees. So they want to do that, right? Because that was the reason why they once chose to work for this company. So there's a lot of energy there. We do a campaign, a week-long campaign with videos, and to make it super fun and energizing to volunteer to join. So we're not telling you have to. We're letting you volunteer, and our aim is that at least 10% of all the employees says yes. And so far we've been between 30 and 60%. And so apparently a lot of employees feel, I want to be part of this. And then I think the key is in the design of actually making the habits really tiny. So ideally, each tiny habit is costing you 0 extra time out of your day. The example that so the theory, the behavioral science theory of tiny habits is twofold. One is you have to connect it to an existing routine, and it really has to be tiny. So the example I tend to use, we had a call center where they got this bleep in their ear whenever a new call was waiting. So we said, okay, one of the habits on the menu is whenever I hear this bleep in my ear, I just think for 2 seconds, how can I give this customer more personal attention? And you will have a different conversation just by being conscious, personal attention matters. So that's how we very consciously design that menu of habits for them to choose from.
One thing that I wanted to, I've spoken a lot about like working with companies, NPS and things like that, right? And that companies are aware of the importance and need for a CX transformation, not just good customer experience. So what are the goals they actually have in mind when they say approach you? Is it just improving the NPS, or do they have some other kind of goals that they actually look for when they think about improving customer experience?
It's changing a bit. So let's say it used to be we need to do something with customer experience, or we see, for years the same score in satisfaction. We want to enhance satisfaction, or indeed we're measuring NPS, but we don't. So I think that the common denominator was we're doing something, but we don't see the impact that we were looking for. I think now more and more in the last maybe 5 years, there's much more talk about we want to create this customer-centric culture organization, right? So that's already moving more towards transformation than just measuring NPS. But trust me, a lot of boards are still pushing for, a bonus on the NPS.
Actually, that was going to be my follow-up, as in like when a company comes to you with a specific goal, does it usually stay that, or does it happen to change through the initial conversation to something else by the end, and like hopefully like the leaders also getting some sort of clarity of what it actually means? So does it end up happening like that as well?
Yes, so my dream, right, my reason of being is that I want to help create more human-centric companies. Well, definitely a few years ago, that was not something that was a big priority for many organizations. So I never sold a project by saying, hey, let's make your company more human-centric. It was always on, okay, I think you feel like you're not influencing NPS, you feel like it's not moving, let's choose one journey, do a pilot of 6 weeks to do one journey and one driver analysis. So also, for example, my journey with Randstad, which in the end was like 5 years across 19 countries, started in Belgium at the time, one journey, and that grew into a global transformation program. So 9 out of 10 times it start, and I'm also advising, right? I'm also saying start in one country, start with one journey, then you feel, okay, this is the added value, and then you start scaling. So it always grows into something that's more than what was originally the idea, because they come in with a more, let's say, functional CX question, and then we try to, persuade them and move them into truthful transformation.
Nice. And going back to when you mentioned about NPS or customer satisfaction, and you're working with drivers with a specific set of people, like who volunteer for it. So how do you, so is it that you're measuring NPS and these things only at the end of the day to actually show the shift in business impact, or are there something other than this also that you measure along with the drivers to measure and say that, okay, there's been a change?
Yeah, so it's a mix. Let's say in the most short term, it's do we see the satisfaction and the drivers go up? That's, let's say, the easiest thing that we want to prove for sure. In the longer term, I think you should also, of course, see the churn go down, see the revenue go up. And so we've also done different comparisons where we saw, hey, customers that rate us an 8, indeed their GP, their revenue is significantly higher than customers that rate us beneath an 8. And on the Tiny Habits side, of course, we also want to see then, hey, after 3 months of Tiny Habits, do we see the satisfaction of customers increase? But we're also, in a qualitative way, depending on the number of employees, otherwise a survey, asking them just 3 questions. Did you feel that this tiny habit was adding any value to your daily work? Did you get some feedback from a customer that maybe you never got before? And do you think this is a tiny habit that all your colleagues should be adopting? And then a few cool things that we do is that we know that we either do like a 5-minute video getting their feedback, and we did like this Christmas after movie with all the beautiful quotes. And so for me, a lot of them were saying like, this makes my work more fulfilling. Well, if you know by now my dream, you know that, okay, I can have 3 years of frustration if one person tells me that their work has become more fulfilling.
But this also drives towards the employees, drivers, and motivations within
Absolutely.
them, right? So does this, like for example, let's say IT support team is incorporating tiny habits in their day-to-day tasks, what is the motivation for them, and how are you essentially making sure that they are following these tiny habit suggestions that you've given them? Are you checking on them every week or every 2 weeks to get a feedback? How do you go about it?
I always try to prevent the energy of checking in, but so let me just take you on my learning journey, because I learn every time as well, right? So when we first ran the tiny habits, and we always say let's experiment for 6 weeks. So you choose a tiny habit, test it for 6 weeks. And of course, we were smart enough to think, if they don't hear anything from us for 6 weeks, chances are, after 6 weeks, which tiny habit again? So what we did back then is that we thought, okay, also from behavioral science, 2 times a week, we send a super short email just saying, hey, Janice, it's now 5 p.m. Wouldn't it be nice to end the day with making a customer happy? But just super short, just even the subject line in their mailbox would make them think, oh yeah, I have a tiny habit that I'm working on. That's one of the learnings that really works well. And of course, we also checked, for example, halfway that we did a virtual session. Hey, if you have any questions, just jump in the call. And so we do facilitate them. We also now make sure we actively involve leadership way more than we did before. So we also have a menu of tiny habits for team leaders and managers. So they are asking their team, hey, how are you doing, Zanna, with your tiny habit? And on the feedback is also a nice lesson. So when we did it the first time, in these nudging emails, at the end, we just asked, hey, if you have some cool feedback, just send it back to us through email. Nobody sent any email in 6 weeks. So then we created 10-minute feedback sessions, and all of them signed up to the 10-minute feedback sessions. So it was individual feedback to answer the 3 questions I just mentioned. So you also just need to play around and figure out, if everybody's crazy busy, what works for them, right? What resonates with them, and then just keep being super innovative in whatever you think of new ways to engage them.
Yeah. So for service design, we have this blueprint. We have the front stage employees and we have the backstage So is your processes or tiny habits only for the front stage actors that the customer is interacting with, or does it also imply for the backstage people who are actually doing all the support roles? Is it for both of them, or is it only for the front stage actors?
It is for both, but what we tend to see is that we start with the front because that has the direct impact on customers. And what we tend to do is that we then translate the tiny habits, because if you're not having direct contact, we can either do two things. We can translate the habit to your colleague. You have an internal customer. So are you giving personal attention when your colleague calls you with a question, for example? Or indeed think of, let's say I'm an engineer, that we also challenge you, instead of thinking, okay, I'm driven by amazing technical innovation, to just place yourself in the shoes of the customer who will be on the receiving end, and then see, would you design it in the same way? But so I think for the non-customer facing roles, you always need to be a bit more creative to make sure that it also resonates with them. But I think one of the key things that we do is, so we make the first draft of the tiny habits, but then we plan 1 hour with, so we have a menu per role. So the call center agents have different habits than, let's say, an account manager. So what we then do, we make a draft of the 10 habits, and then we plan just a 1 hour call with, let's say, 2 or 3 call center agents or 2 or 3 account managers, and let them give feedback and say, okay, but this is a really weird habit, or this is a routine that I never do. So then you have a very effective way of co-creating a menu where they feel, hey, this menu makes sense for my daily work. It's not some crazy head office thing that somebody created. That's also really valuable.
Yeah. Now there are also AI agents. So what do you have to say for AI agents? Do you have any habits for them as well? How do you
I think I also posted like last week where I definitely believe also we're using AI as well, right? As I just mentioned, we're creating also the Zanna AI, but just the sheer amount of immensely bad chatbots still out there. So for me, also when I call customer service or when I use a chatbot, I just enter in no as many times as possible so that the bot is saying, let me connect you to an employee. So for me, the quality of AI in that sense is still super bad.
Yeah. But is there a possibility to fine-tune chatbots and AI agents in the future using your methodology and framework? So I'm seeing huge potential for chatbots to be more human-centric. You can rely on chatbots more than humans to maintain consistency.
Exactly.
So do you
I think that's the same, right? I think that because the drivers are so universal, right? I think if you just feed the AI, say make sure that you give the people a sense of personal attention, treat them with respect, etc., then I think the AI should be smart enough to have a more human response than just being, let's say, an elite FAQ database, right? Yeah.
For me, what was unique was when you talk about CX transformation, you inherently, as you also mentioned, right, it's not just about the end customers, but the employees play a very key role in actually bringing about the customer transformation or customer experience. Could you share a little bit about it? Because that I feel is like really unique perspective that, if you can share your thoughts around that.
Yeah, I think so. One of the challenges when it comes, so in my perception, employee experience is sort of 10 years behind of CX when it comes to importance in companies. And so right now it's still once a year HR is measuring something, but it's more a check in the box than, hey, we actually want to enhance the employee experience. So I've been thinking a lot, how can I best integrate it and where should I start? And in my experience, when you start talking to companies about employee experience, it often becomes a long debate with HR, with culture, and before you know it, it becomes very abstract and nothing's going to happen. So one of my conclusions was, because the sense of purpose of employees is often so well connected to the key driver of customers, that I always say also start EX from the customer perspective. So once we figure out, okay, we always start by discovering what matters most to customer, And then, for example, we do a quiz, right? We do a quiz to share what you think is the main driver, because all the assumptions are wrong, of course. So that's already creating a lot of fun, energy, and awareness. And then employees feel, hey, yeah, but giving personal attention, giving good advice, that was actually the reason why I wanted to work for this bank. That's why I wanted to work at this company. And then you have a very subtle but very concrete, tangible way to actually start working in parallel on employee experience without maybe calling it employee experience.
So as you define the drivers for the employees, is it influenced by the company purpose or something at some level, or does this shape the company purpose at some level? Like what kind of influences the other, or both influence each other? Like how does that work?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both, because when we design, for example, the service for the customers, I'm always asking what's your brand promise, what are your brand values, and I put them in the survey to see if there are drivers or not. And so, of course, you can have a strategic choice and say, I'm all about personal attention. But if for the customers, personal attention doesn't matter because it's all about ease of doing things, then maybe you should sort of reprioritize. Other way around, finding the drivers can be, we thought our personal attention was really important, but now we see that ease of doing things is the number one. Maybe we should also redefine our values, right? So I think it works both ways. And for me, when we find the drivers on the employee side, so we use the same smart statistics, but I think most employee engagement surveys are very transactional as well, right? It's HR topics, it's salary, it's benefits, it's diversity and inclusion. So when we do the drivers of employee experience, we also do it on a different level, right? For example, questions around purpose. Do you feel that your manager is, enhancing your sense of purpose? Do you feel like you're making a daily impact on customers? And then we use that to figure out, okay, from the 3 pillars, what has the biggest impact? And then we see that recently that purpose, for example, was the number 1 driver for employee engagement. Then you can start drafting leadership behaviors and leadership tiny habits that enhance this sense of purpose. And that's how everything is beautifully connected.
But what do you do if employees don't have a purpose aligned to company's purpose? Let's say that a job is just a job for them, but their actual purpose is something else that they're doing on the side. How do you bring in that sense of purpose for a job that they're looking at?
Yeah, that's a really, let's say, actual question, because with one of my clients, we're actually going into a journey where we want to help employees figure out what's my personal purpose, and then see how can you connect your personal purpose to the company's purpose. I think that's a beautiful journey, right? To also facilitate for your employees. And I think another beautiful example was when, so they had a conversation about, and then one of the leaders said, okay, but even if right now you feel, well, my purpose of working here is because I need to pay the mortgage. Okay, then ask yourself why, right? So why does it matter to me to make money? Well, because I want to provide for my family. Why does it matter for me to provide for my family? Because I want to be a good parent. I'm just making it up, right? But even if the initial drive is financially, I think, and in the end, some people are motivated by finance. Fine, right? I think you don't have to judge somebody's purpose. So if that's what's making you happy, but I think 90% of the people, there's a why behind wanting to make money. And I think by asking yourself that why a few times, you get more to, let's say, a deeper level of, yes, the financial things matter, but hey, in essence, I want to be a good parent. Okay, being a good parent, that makes me have these qualities. How can I bring these qualities to work, for example, right? Maybe I want to mentor younger colleagues. And I think that's how you can also blend personal purpose with the company's purpose.
Yeah, because if you look at the current stats, a lot of the employees don't stay in organizations for more than 2 years.
Yeah.
And that's also seen as a strategic decision, because if when you jump from organization to organization after 2 years, there's a 30% increment that you get, versus if you retain yourself in a specific organization, your salary component is not hiking up that much.
Yeah.
A lot of employees have realized that logic, right? So there was an interesting thing that I don't remember which company it was. In order to increase an employee's lifetime value within the company, what they had introduced is a scheme where they could put in a percentage of their salary into a fund which was associated to something that they want to purchase in the future. It could be a car, it could be a bike, or it could be whatever that is. And that was kept as an anchor for the employee to continue working, and they would add in a percentage of interest as well. So they had built a very interesting system to retain an employee for a minimum of 5 years.
So I thought you were going to share the example of Zappos. So Zappos, what they did is when, I think day one, or let's say the last day of onboarding, they offer you 1 month of salary if you leave the organization right then and there. I think that's also very interesting, filter of who's actually really motivated to stay. I think that's a nice example. For Gen Z as well, I think Gen Z is really looking for purpose, right? And I think so many companies have gone too far in, being money driven, being KPI nuts. But I think it's if you get a CEO and a C-level that's really convinced about the importance of purpose, I think you can quickly turn things around. And I think that's one of the key things to also make sure that Gen Z feels that they have a place in that company, because for them, purpose is even more relevant than for, let's say, my generation and above.
Seems like the drivers are different for different generations or different segments of people, or at different stages in your life. Seems like your personal drivers could be different, and finding that linkage with a company's motivation and purpose might, I don't know how you're doing that, because let's say in an organization which has 1,000 employees, how do you go about doing this?
Well, I think, but I'm also a very, let's say, naive person who likes to look at the world from, a kind of pink glasses, right? So I want to stay in my naive, happy bubble, because I think that, and for example, we also compared, right? We compared scores in employee engagement of the different generations, for example, and there was not such a big difference. I always say there's more that connects us than that differentiates us, based on all the surveys we've done across the globe and all the different cultures. But what I think is that an organization system creates, let's say, a specific type of person, right? So people are impacted by the organization system that they're working in. So if I've been the last, 30 to 50 years, right? We had the Industrial Revolution 100 years ago, people working in factories, and we needed to manage them, right? Task steering, KPIs. Of course, the world doesn't work like that anymore, but if organization systems are still focused on that, then I think you create, I'm not sure if you literally change the DNA, but you push me away from my original need to feel a sense of purpose, because I'm not getting that from you. So I have very much hope that when you focus on the purpose side, you're not only connecting with Gen Z, you're also connecting with the others. It might take a bit longer because they come from a longer history of not being used to, what's this fluffy purpose thing, right? We were all about, financials. But I think in essence, it's such a human need. And I think that's what was one of my favorite conclusions when we did the research across all those 20 countries, literally from Japan to Argentina. The human factor was for everybody, and it was not just B2C, it was also B2B. So my conclusion is we're so much more the same, and there are such universal needs that we are addressing that companies are not addressing, that I think there's so much potential. If we just go and fix that, I think we can really make a huge impact.
So when companies come to you asking for CX change and you tell them we need to change the EX, what is the reaction? Because it's not that easy to see, right? Like, you change your employees' behavior, it has an impact on your customer experience. It can be a little distant to kind of grasp that idea. So just curious to know, what are the kind of reactions that you've got?
So I think one of my, as I mentioned, right, I've learned a lot, right, in my journey from a young professional to now. And I think one of the key things is that, and I think this is relevant for any person in CX or any person that wants to bring change about an organization. I think as long as you are coming to them from your perspective and you feel they need to change something, you will always get resistance. But if you understand and are compassionate, hey, this is your context, this is your goal you want to achieve, and I can connect my dream and my goals to yours, then right, it's a win-win for everyone. And I think, so I never start a conversation with a company saying we need to change employee experience. If I feel that they need steerable information, and all of them do, okay, let's start with a driver analysis, prove it works, then you say, hey, the number one driver is this human element. Hey, let's go and work on the human element. But now we have hard steerable data that says it's good to invest time in the human element. And that's how you slowly but surely, step by step, proving it works, right? Proving measurable results. You create trust and then you start expanding. I think timing is everything, right? If you really need to feel when the time has come also to talk about KPIs. I never start talking about KPIs. That's maybe after, 6 months, 1 year into the program, you say, hey, maybe, we should also connect the drivers to KPIs.
So, with respect to tiny habits, which you use extensively in your methodology, what would you say are the limitations that you found of that specific framework of habit change? Or are there any other things that you have explored that maybe did not work as well?
My DNA is to always see possibilities and not really think too much about what's not working. So let me think if there are limitations to the tiny habits. I think in the end, the challenge, as with everything, is during the campaign, everybody's excited. Almost everybody's testing the habits. The challenge becomes after the campaign, how do we make sure that not just the volunteers, but everybody is doing the habits? So that's when we say, okay, based on the learnings, we've created a benchmark of these habits were the most popular, the most impactful. So let's make sure that in onboarding new employees, they also get something where they understand the new habits. Right, we make sure that the leadership is also experimenting every month with a new habit to inspire their colleagues. So it's always, let's say, year 1 of CX transformation is pretty blueprinted. We need to do something with journeys, with tiny habits, with metrics. Year 2 is all about how do we get it in DNA. And that, I think, one of the documents that I now have is like 28 different ways of how you need to get something in the DNA, because it's so many things that you need to do in parallel, and to really make sure that it's independent from the program in the end. So I think tiny habits as such works really well. I think the challenge is always how to make sure that if it's no longer a campaign or a program, that it really becomes part of the standard way of working.
Is that what kind of also makes it sustainable then, like once you embed it into the DNA? So that's kind of essential to sustainability of the entire campaign and therefore.
Yeah, and I think also when the employees themselves, they experience 2 things, right? The specific habit, they feel, hey, this is adding value. But you're also, let's say your second order effect is that they learn how to use the technique of tiny habits. So a lot of them are also energized to say, hey, but I can also use this at home. Or hey, I can also maybe think of new habits, because just the technique of tiny habits is really energizing to them. I just put a post-it note on my screen to not forget to give personal attention. Right? Sometimes it's that simple, and you'll have different mindset and different conversations.
Okay, we'll just wrap up with some of the main questions that we wanted to tie your work with the work that we do as service designers. If you had to guide, let's say, young, maybe tomorrow service designers get moved up in the ladder and they become CX transformation professionals. You never know. So if you want to give us a guidance or any feedback that we should be incorporating in our today's work, what would that be, so that we can start slowly upskilling ourselves?
Yeah, I think the beauty of, let's say, we also in our intake, we talked about, let's say, really good quality service design and hype service design, right? So I think you are in the high quality Champions League service design, and I think the added the added value there is the qualitative way that you are assessing it. I think is super valuable, and that's something that I'm always lacking, right? That's a conscious choice, but I think connecting the two, I think that's where the real magic happens. So I think let's say if you figure out personal attention, it becomes a bit boring, but I'm just using the example, is the number one, then I think with your design skills, okay, 2 things, right? How can we design for personal attention? But also if we know this driver, then you can also make just a super short survey with 3 questions. What's the baseline? How did he feel about personal attention? We start experimenting, and then we measure again those 3 questions at the end, and you already have quantitative data to show to the organization, hey, look, we are actually making an impact. So I think just thinking smart but pragmatically, how can we add also a quantitative flavor to the service design that we are already doing?
Yeah. What if we were part of your team? Let's say you had a team to push these drivers. What would the task would you give service designers to look into for these 3 months, and where would we be supporting you?
Yeah, I can imagine, because so first step for us is to find the drivers of a journey, and then what we also do is a journey redesign. So based on the drivers we discovered, based on maybe what type of questions does this journey generate, what complaints do we get, so a lot of internal data. Then we build a journey team. So then with the journey team, we start helping them to think of 2 or 3 things they can start improving in the next 2 weeks. I think if in that moment of the program you have service design skills, I think then of course you can take it to the next level. I think that's one part. And the other part that's not so much in our scope is so we can provide the drivers, but we are not, for me, service design is really also on the innovation layer. So I always say I'm focused on enhancing the experience of existing customers. I'm not the one that is going to create the best new product or the best new approach, right? I think that's also for me where service design adds the most value.
That's awesome. I'm really hoping that we get to collaborate more with CX transformation professionals, and we have more of you in all organizations. But thank you so much for taking your time out and sharing all of your learnings with us. To keep learning about designing services, follow Navigating Service Design.